All set. Hare Krishna, Balaram Prabhu. We're all set. We're live now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for this opportunity, Yashodhanan Prabhu, for allowing me to speak on Srimad Bhagavatam. We will quickly chant Mangalacharan and then we'll get on with the topic, today's discussion. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. It's really odd because all I see is my face in front of the screen versus any devotees. But I'm hoping and assuming that there are devotees listening live, because I believe it's getting broadcasted through YouTube. So today's discussion, I was told that there is a series on Srimad Bhagavatam that's been happening for the last few weeks. And today's discussion is focused on the 5th chapter of the first canto. Before we dive into the discussion of this particular chapter, there are certain, I would say, important perspectives that we should be aware of. For devotees within the the Hare Krishna movement, especially of which Srila Prabhupada is the founder Acharya, there are certain standards, certain principles that we all have been blessed with through our spiritual masters, and we continue to follow that, live our life based on those principles. Among all the important principles that we have been blessed with, one of the very important, I should say, the anga or the limb of devotional service is the process of hearing. This process is not only the fundamental, or I should say the foundation of our spiritual life, but in general also we see majority of the knowledge that we acquire in this world, large part it is through the process of hearing. We hear about what's happening today, right? We are like in a pandemic. Everybody is pretty much locked down at home. So the obvious question is why. We find that out through different channels. News is one of the prominent channel. There's so much emphasis on hearing. Now what you hear will ultimately determine your destination. There is a very interesting verse in the Bhagavad Gita, 13th chapter. This chapter is the section of Bhagavad Gita where Krishna talks about jnana, about knowledge, and how this is important for one's development of Krishna consciousness. In this chapter, Krishna begins by explaining what is Kshetra, Kshetragya. And as he progresses along the discussion, he comes to a point where he makes a very bold and very, I should say, it sounds very interesting to me, because In many places, he talks about liberation, and many places he talks about, you know, the process that he is defined. Here in this chapter specifically, he talks about that if we understand, if one understands, you know, the field of activity, the knower of the field, and the other knower, which is the Paramatma within the heart, if they know this, three things, we become liberated from the cycle of birth, old age, death, and disease. And it's interesting because right after that, he talks about three um, kinds of people who aspire to become liberated. And he gives, Krishna gives his perspective about who are these three kinds of people. You know, so from verse 24, 25, he talks about, you know, people use the process of gyan, people who are, you know, highly intellect, they take this path. You know, people take the path of yoga, practice of yoga. And he also talks about the fruity workers, you know, the karma yogis who, by the process of nishkama karma yoga, they are offering the fruits of their labor based on the instructions from the Shastras. They offer it back to the Lord, and that's how they perfect. Now, in the 26th verse, he makes a very interesting, he categorizes this class of people, which I found very interesting when I came across this verse. And this verse is emphasizing the process of hearing. Like Krishna says, Anyetva evam ajnata shrutvenabhya upasate te api chaitidaryante eva mrityu shruti parayana. So he says, Krishna is saying that, and Srila Prabhupada's the translation as it is, he says, again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, it's very important for us to understand. So this class of people, they are not highly conversant with spiritual knowledge. What do? They begin to worship the Supreme Person. And how do they begin to worship the Supreme Person? They begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him. Just the process of hearing, just by hearing that I'm supposed to worship the Supreme Lord, they begin the worship of the Supreme Lord, right? About him from others. Now then Prabhupada concludes the translation. Prabhupada says, because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. Now this is such a sweet verse that Krishna is giving, this instruction is giving to Arjuna, through Arjuna is giving it to us. That if we develop this tendency to hear from the right authorities, right, from the Mahajans, from the Gurus, from the exalted Vaishnavas, right, if we just give oral reception to this message of the Shastras, what happens? Krishna says they also transcend the path of birth and death. So this is how powerful the process of hearing is. Right? If we can just give oral reception to the right message and get it from the right source, right? We don't have to worry so much, because if you study the previous three verses, and Prabhupada writes beautiful purport to those verses, there are people who are inclined to many things, right? People who are highly intellect, people who have the determination to do a lot of austerity, do a lot of tapasya. But there is a general class of people who are not so inclined for those things. So for them, Krishna also categorizes that, you know, if you can just with faith hear, if you can just hear with faith, what happens? We can become free from the process of birth, old age, death, and disease, right? So with that context, I would like to begin today's discussion on Narada's instruction. Right? The chapter of 5th is entitled Narada's instruction on Srimad Bhagavatam for Vyasadeva. One very interesting principle here is, again, we will see throughout this chapter. I was told to summarize it. There are there are many different perspectives. There are many different or interesting principles, points that you can gather from this particular chapter, primarily from Srila Prabhupada's purports. Now, the context here is that Sutta Goswami has begun the discussion on Srimad Bhagavatam, and he had answered the 6 questions that the sages have asked in chapter 1, 2, 3. And in the 4th chapter, the sages they are thanking Sutta Goswami for so beautifully explaining the answers to the questions that they asked. Now they are even more curious to know, so they are curious to know more about Srimad Bhagavatam. So then they are asking the questions to Sutta Goswami. They wanted to know 4 things. They wanted to know when this Bhagavatam was spoken, what was the place, right? And who spoke it. And most important, in the 3rd verse of the 4th chapter, the sages are asking Sutta Goswami, what was the inspiration? What was the inspiration behind the birth of Srimad Bhagavatam? What inspired Vyasadeva to compose this literature, right? So that was the seed. Their question was the seed, which is, the fruit of that is this 5th chapter. And then in the ending part of the 4th chapter, we see how Vyasadeva, he takes this task upon himself because he's seeing the future. He's an incarnation of the personality of Godhead. He's referred to as Bhagwan Vyasadeva. And he can see the future. So he saw what was coming. He probably saw this pandemic too, right? He saw what was coming. And based on his realization and based on his vision, he decided to help. He decided to help the general population. And the process of help began where he divided the Vedas. He composed the Puranas. And then in essence, basically, he gathered this huge body of knowledge, which was like this one Veda called Yajur Veda. He broke that down. And then he, categorized them in a way where people can understand. And he gave each of these Vedas to his disciples. And then he gave the Puranas to Sutta Goswami's father, Romaharshana. So like that, everything was done. And he was satisfied. But then something happened where even after compiling all this great body of literature, he felt despondent. He was not feeling very satisfied. He was not happy, although he did such a amazing work. Within his heart, he was still feeling some void. And in his deep meditation, in his deep contemplation, he gets the answer to his problem. Right? He gets the answer to his problem, and which is like the end part of the 4th chapter, where he realizes that, what, I have done this, this work, but I think I have not properly glorified the Supreme Lord, Shri Krishna. And maybe that's why I'm feeling dissatisfaction within my heart. Right? And this was something that he was contemplating, he was deeply thinking. And right at that time, Narad Muni appears on the scene. And it is explained that this is not, usually as devotees, we understand that everything is the arrangement of the Lord. Right? Whatever happens in the life of a devotee or whatever circumstances that we all come across, it is all in one way or the other arranged by the Lord. So here, it is explained by our acharyas that the descent of Srimad Bhagavatam, and especially Narada coming at that time to see Vyasadeva, it was all the arrangement of the Lord. Right? Like we know Parikshit Maharaj being a pure devotee of the Lord, and senses completely under control, mind completely under control, a self-realized soul, a Mahabhagavat. How he was thirsty and he garlanded Shamik Rishi, and then his son Shringi cursed him. So on the onset, we can see that such a great soul, such a determined soul, sense controlled, mind, body, words, everything in order. And still he, because of this thirst, he apparently insulted this particular sage, Shamikrishi. So our Acharyas explain that, and this is the same person who's sitting at the bank of Ganges to fast for 7 days without water and food. So the understanding is that this is how the Lord arranged for Srimad Bhagavatam to descend. So here in the same situation, Narad Muni's appearance is not, it was all arranged by the Lord, right? Because we have to understand that especially whatever happens in the life of a great soul, it is all, orchestrated by the Supreme Lord. Nothing is by chance. So here Vyasadeva, being despondent, he almost knows the answer, right? But right at that time, Narad Muni comes. And then this chapter begins. Excuse me. This chapter begins by Sutta Goswami, telling or addressing the sages that Narad Muni has come. He was comfortably seated, and interestingly, he was smiling. Right? He was smiling. Why was he smiling? Now, Srila Prabhupada hints in the purport, and then different acharyas, they give different perspectives to why Narada was smiling. And we saw that same situation in Bhagavad Gita when Arjuna, in a complete, total depression, when he approaches Krishna for help, Krishna also smiles. Prahasanya iva Bharata, right? He's smiling, right? Now, what does the smile indicate? Now, here, Narad Muni also is smiling, right? So there are many perspectives. One is mentioned in Srila Prabhupada's purport, that Narad Muni smiled because he knew what was Vyasadev's problem, right? So sometimes somebody comes to us and they're asking us questions, and in our mind we already heard the problem for this devotee or whatever. We know. So when the question comes to us, we may have apparently, I already know the answer, or I know how to answer this question. So that is one reason why he smiled. Another reason is, it is explained, is Narad Muni, he wanted to show to Vyasadeva that the problem that you think, or the problem that you are holding in your heart, for you it may be a super complicated issue, but actually it is not at all a big huge problem. We can solve it smilingly. We can solve, or we can address, or I can address this query of yours smilingly, right? That's why Narad Muni, one of the reasons Narad Muni smiled at Vyasadeva. So now the storyline continues. So the whole there are two important perspectives or points that I want to bring out. One is this part of the conversation that takes place between Narada and Vyasadeva, and how Narada inspires Vyasadeva. And then Narad Muni giving his own example. He wants to give an example that, how somebody who has taken to the process of bhakti yoga, how that person can advance in the association of devotees, right? So those are the two sections within this particular chapter. And our acharyas also explained that this chapter also forms one of the seed of Srimad Bhagavatam, right? The second chapter of the first canto, and we all know that in the second canto, 9th chapter, the 4 seed verses that the Supreme Lord Shri Vishnu spoke to Brahmaji, that becomes like the foundation, the Chaturshloki Bhagavat verses, that becomes like the foundation of these 18,000 verses that were composed by Vyasadeva. So similarly, this chapter, why it is a seed? Because this chapter is like an inspiration. This chapter inspired the birth of Srimad Bhagavatam, although it is through a dialogue between Narada and Vyasadeva. But how that happened, right? How that happened is mentioned in this chapter. So now, when Narad Muni comes, ideally, Narad would, Vyasadeva, it may seem like Narada's properly worshipped. He's seated. He's given the respect that is due to him. as you know, as we would do for our spiritual master Vyasadev's spiritual master Narad Muni. So he did all that formalities, and then ideally Vyasadeva would begin his inquiry. Right? Vyasadeva would say, I've done all my, now I have a query, my dear Guru Maharaj, because query prashnena sevaya, you do the service and then you inquire, right? So he has done his service, he has done his seva to Narad Muni, and it's time for inquiry. But interestingly, that doesn't happen. Narad Muni just begins his inquiry. His inquiry. He starts by inquiring about, are you satisfied? Second verse, are you satisfied by identifying with body, mind as object of self-realization? And then he's basically glorifying. He's glorifying Vyasadeva, right? He's glorifying Vyasadeva for the kind of work he has done, because he already knows Vyasadev's dilemma. He already knows Vyasadev's, query. But before he's about to chastise Vyasadeva, he wants to glorify for the kind of work he has done. And this is another, we can see this is like an etiquette which we can learn when we have to be in a similar situation like this. So Narad Muni, he glorifies Vyasadeva. In the fourth verse, he says, you have fully delineated the subject of impersonal Brahman as well as the knowledge derived therefrom. Why should you be despondent in spite of all this, thinking that you are undone, my dear Prabhu? Now, he's basically creating, although he knows what is Vyasadev's problem, he's basically creating a situation by asking the questions to Vyasadeva, right? Hey, I understand that you are disturbed. I understand that you are, in this particular situation. But my understanding is that you've done great work, right? In the previous words, he talks about that you have compiled Mahabharata, right? And this Mahabharata, you have, you basically, your ultimate goal of Mahabharata was moksha. Ultimate goal of Mahabharata is liberation. And you basically very systematically explained. And especially for the folks in Kali Yuga, this literature, will absorb their mind. This literature will absorb their mind, although it is filled with philosophy, but the way you have presented it, right? You have presented it in the form of the story that will attract people's mind, and ultimately they will get liberated. So why are you disturbed? What is the reason for your disturbance? So then Vyasadeva, he begins what he thinks is the cause. He's not really talking about the cause, but he's basically saying that, yes, my dear Guru Maharaj, whatever you're speaking is right. I have done all this, but yet deep within my heart, I don't feel satisfied. I don't feel satisfied. Why I am so despondent in spite of compiling, dividing these Vedas, writing all these Puranas and this great body of literatures. I have nicely, organized, and I've given it, to my disciples, and then they will go and further it down and, continue the legacy, right? But I am still feeling despondent. What is the reason? So now he's giving the qualification of Narad Muni. Why Narad Muni is the capable, although ideally he's a spiritual master, but he's giving the reason, and very important reason that he mentions is in the 6th verse. Right? In the 6th verse of this chapter, Vyasadeva is saying that everything that is mysterious is known to you. Why? Right? Why everything that is mysterious in this universe is known to you? Right? Why? Because you worship the creator and destroyer of the material world and the mentor of the spiritual world, the original personality of Godhead, who is transcendental to the 3 modes of material nature. So basically what this verse is saying, that any person who is sincerely serving, who is sincerely worshipping the Lord, everything that is to be known, and this is something Srila Prabhupada emphasized it many times, right? A devotee of the Lord who is sincerely serving him, he knows everything, right? He knows everything in the sense he knows everything that will allow him to continue his service and develop his relationship with the Lord, right? So that is one of the things that Vyasadeva is mentioning to Narad Muni, right? And then he goes on. Now, the dialogue is happening, interestingly, Narad Muni, now he gets right to the point, right? Because you have to understand, when there's a conversation that happens, between these two great personalities, there is no, how do you say that? There's no beating around the bush, right? Narada doesn't suddenly glorify, Vyasadeva. No, 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 what you're saying about me is right, but, he's not expressing his humility as such. Or, he doesn't need all that, right? In the next about 11 or 12 verses, Narad Muni sets things straight, right? So when in the conversation with great souls, this is a very important principle where Narad Muni is not thinking, oh, if I speak like this, am I being too insensitive to my disciple, or how do I present it so that he understands, but at the same time I'm not hurting his feelings. So that doesn't happen here, right? But at our level, this may not be so appropriate, right? Because every time somebody comes to us with a problem or a solution, sometimes it's so apparent that the problem is with this person, right? But we cannot say it. We cannot say it so directly. We have to figure out, we have to sugarcoat it sometimes, right? And sometimes even, with the spiritual master, the spiritual master, as much as, love and affection he has for us, but he's also super sensitive. If I tell this, the disciple may go away, or the disciple, how. So all this goes on, when we are having a dialogue, right? But here, interestingly, you see, as soon as Vasudev stops, Narad Muni just gets right through it. This just one verse explains, right? He basically tells him, what's the problem? The problem is you have not broadcasted. In the 8th verse, Narad Muni says, you have not actually broadcast the sublime and spotless glories of the personality of Godhead. That philosophy which does not satisfy the transcendental senses of the Lord is considered worthless. So now what is happening here is Vyasadeva, he has a goal, right? His goal, because when he had the vision, when he saw the future, he saw all the, what was going to happen, the kind of people who are going to live and exist at this time. So for them, he created this situation. He created this literature so that they could take shelter of it and ultimately achieve liberation. Right? That was his perspective. So whatever division, whatever philosophy, whatever description about the Lord that he put, the purpose was liberation. Right? So just keep that in mind, because the obvious question is, number one, why is he despondent? And the number second is the work that he did. What was the deficiency in his work? And that is what Narad Muni is going to point out. Right? Narad Muni is going to point out the deficiency in the work that Vyasadeva has done. Right? And to summarize this particular section, basically what Narad Muni is saying is that even though, and in fact Vyasadeva says that even though you have glorified, like there are many scriptures, right? Many scriptures like Padma Puran, Vishnu Puran, there are many places where even Mahabharat Krishna is glorified, right? Krishna's yash or Krishna's glory is being described in these literatures. But the purpose of that glorification is liberation, right? And that is what Narad Muni is condemning, right? Because the goal of glorifying Krishna is meant to please Krishna. There is no other purpose, right? But your glorification, in many places, some places you have sprinkled some glorification of the Lord. The purpose of that was for moksha, and that is what Narad Muni is condemning, right? And then Narad Muni further along the way, he also talks about the deficiency or the work that Vyasadeva has done. He, in one way, there are people who are fruitive in nature. Their mentality is fruitive in nature. So you have, in the name of religion, you have encouraged them to continue on with their fruitive mentality. Now, no doubt, gradually they will come to the understanding that, this fruitive mentality, I'll go up to Swarga and again come down, perform karma, again go up. So after doing that for many, many lifetimes, someday they will come to their senses and they will take to the path of devotional service. But you have actually prolonged the journey of this living entity in this material world, right? So that was another, uh, uh, I should say, deficiency in Vyasadev's work. And Vyasadeva is acknowledging whatever Narad Muni is saying. He's acknowledging that and he's realizing it, because the words of the spiritual master is not only to uplift our consciousness, but at the same time also help us what is that we are doing, which is either taking us up or which is taking us down, right? So in this particular scenario, Narad Muni is giving that information out to Vyasadeva, right? And then he's glory again. Once that description is done, he's again glorifying Vyasadeva, right? He's basically giving this instruction to Vyasadeva that although you have done that, but you are a Brahman realized, you are a self-realized soul. Because all this work that you have done is not possible for an ordinary living entity to do this work that you have done. So you have the capabilities, you have the qualities, you have the qualification to properly glorify the Supreme Lord for the sake of only glorification, right? So what is the distinction? Because if you see now, one thing as devotees, we have to be very careful when we study this particular text. And sometimes we make this mistake that now, try to understand, Narad Muni is not canceling any of the other scriptures, right? He's not canceling. When I say canceling, basically means sometimes, and this is if you study Bhagavad Gita, just to give an example, if you study Bhagavad Gita, now some of us have the understanding that the different process of yoga is like a ladder, right? We have the karma kanda, then we have karma yoga, jnana yoga, then bhakti yoga is on the top, right? So we have this, some of our devotees explain it that way, right? And then ultimately we have the final, in the end of 18th chapter, we have Sarva Dharma Parityaja. This is the most quoted verse devotees, they will always use this. Forget everything, just surrender to Krishna, right? All these duties that you're doing, it's useless, right? But that is a very neophyte understanding, because it's not that the verses, the 1866 verse doesn't cancel all that Krishna has spoken, right? It is a hope. The 1866 is a hope-giving verse, right? It is giving us hope. It's giving Arjuna hope that if you dedicate your activities, if you dedicate your work to me, if you work for me, right? Ma Sucha, I am giving the assurance that I'll take care of all your sinful reaction, right? So it is, the entire Bhagavad Gita is like this big body of integration. All these yoga process are all integrated with each other, right? Although I am not situated on this highest ladder of bhakti yoga, right? I may be down, way down. I may be like this karma kandi, like sakama, karma yogi, right? But my aspiration is I'll eventually land in this particular ladder, the topmost ladder of bhakti yoga. I may be doing the angas, I may be doing the limbs of devotional service, but my mentality may be I'm doing everything that bhakti yoga is telling me for getting my so-called, I'm a fruity person. I'm trying to get that because the bhakti, the element of bhakti is in each of this yoga. That's what it makes it yoga, right? So here, when Narada is speaking, he is not basically saying Mahabharata is useless, Vedanta Sutra is useless, Upanishads are useless, the Vedas are useless. That is not his point, right? Here, Narad Muni is exclusively trying to glorify the process of bhakti, right? That is what Narad Muni is doing. He is basically glorifying bhakti. So, my dear Vyasadeva, you compose a literature that exclusively talks about the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavan Shri Krishna, for the sake of not liberation, for the sake of glorification. Because he is the person, is the only person in this creation worthy of glorification. So that scripture is Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam has no other agenda for that matter. Srimad Bhagavatam, in every page of Srimad Bhagavatam, every verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, the agenda is to glorify Krishna. And that glorification of Krishna, if anybody does, right, then what happens? The love which is dormant within our heart becomes awakened, right? That is what the whole purpose of Srimad Bhagavatam is, right? Because the qualification. So we have to. This is something very important. We have to understand. Narad Muni is not rejecting. He is the sole purpose of his coming and coming to meet Vyasadeva was so that Vyasadeva could edit this Bhagavad Puran and elaborate on the pastimes of the Supreme Lord Shri Krishna, by which, if any conditioned soul who becomes attracted, who is inclined, as in the 13th chapter, 26th verse of Bhagavad Gita, we heard, if you are inclined to the process of hearing, just by giving oral reception, to the process of hearing about the Lord, what happens? That dormant love within our heart becomes awakened. Right? And that is what Srimad Bhagavatam does to us. Right? That is what Narad Muni is basically explaining. You write this literature so that the people of Kali Yuga, if they hear Srimad Bhagavatam, right, regularly, Nashta Prayeshu, Abhadreshu, all the Abhadras in our heart becomes destroyed just by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam regularly. So that was the purpose of Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, so what happens to all the other literatures, right? So the other literatures are there because, as I mentioned, we are all practicing, we are all sadhakas. Sadhakas means we are all practicing Uttama Bhakti. Right? So within the practice of Uttama Bhakti, we don't need to take shelter as such of any other process, right? But we always have to understand one important principle is that trying to identify what is my position, where am I, right? What is your mentality? Because in the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also talks about that whole ladder process, right? You think about me 24 hours, you cannot do that, then work for me. If you cannot work for me, at least do some charity. So he gives us different levels, right? The idea of those different levels is to gradually elevate us, right? And this usually most of us get put off by this word gradual, because the spiritual life is a journey, right? The journey that we all take from one life to other life, right? The journey continues on, right? So our anxiety should not be in after this life where I'll go back to Godhead. Our anxiety should not be that. Our anxiety should be that whatever number of years that is left in this particular body that has been gifted to us by Prakriti, how am I using this body in the service of Krishna? Because that is our journey, right? So we continue that journey by following the instructions of Srimad Bhagavatam. What Narad Muni is basically telling Vyasadeva that you write this literature. This literature, you compile it in such a way where any living entity who hears the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead becomes liberated. Now, obviously, Vyasadeva will have a question that is there an example? Is there an example that you can quote who actually went from this lowest grade of life and he became advanced by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, right? So to that, Vedavyas, Narad Muni, he gives his own example, right? What best, rather than quoting somebody else whom I not even know. Sometimes we use an example, or one devotee over there, he did this, did that, and I may have no relationship with that devotee, so I can't even relate to that particular example. So here, Narad Muni, being the expert he is, he's giving his own example because Vyasadeva has a relationship with him, so he could better understand. So Narad Muni gives an example that before I became this, whatever glorification that you offered to me, before I, began worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and I know everything about the Lord as much as I am supposed to know to serve Him. He gives the example that how in a previous millennium that he was born as a maid servant son, right? He was born as a maid servant son, and in that body, his mother, she was old, she was widowed, she was living in an ashram. And one time during rainy season, during the Chaturmas time, usually the sannyasis, they don't travel. So for the 4 months, she hosted, or I should say, the sages, there were some sages, they came and they stayed there. And Narad Muni, he was just like 5-year-old boy. he had the opportunity to serve them. He serve them prasadam, and basically he was just there like a bellboy. He was just there anytime there was any need. He was there to help or offer any service to these great sages. And along with that, while he was doing that, every morning and evening, he heard, the references made to Bhakti Vedantas, right? Bhakti Vedantas basically means who understands the tattva of bhakti, right? And in essence, these are the sages who have perfected their life by the process of devotional service, right? And they were speaking Bhagavad Gita. They were speaking Bhagavatam every day, morning and evening. And Narad Muni, all he did was he heard them. Right? He heard them attentively, and with their permission, it is explained that he ate their uchishta. He took the remnants of these great souls, and it is explained. The verse explains that how as soon as he ate those remnants of this great soul, all the sins from his heart were destroyed. And when the sins from his heart were destroyed, he developed this strong urge to hear more about the Lord. And in Bhagavatam, in the second chapter, it is explained how, right? Shushusho Shaddadhanasya Vasudeva Kataruchi Syan Mahat Sevaya Vipra. Right? When we do Mahat Seva, right? When we do Mahat Seva, what happens? We develop an affinity to hear, right? How do we know? When we develop this affinity to hear, the result or the cause of that is when we do Mahat Seva, right? When we serve great souls, that's the fruit of the service of the great soul is that we develop an affinity to hear Bhagavatam. We develop an affinity to hear about Krishna, and that's exactly what happened to Narad Muni. He was serving the great souls. He had the remnants, right? By having the remnants, his sins was destroyed, and then he developed this strong urge to hear, right? And Narad Muni explains that how the Bhaktivedantas were so merciful to him. So they actually taught him the angas of devotional service, that how we should perform devotional service, right? Practically, this instruction or this information was awarded to Narad Muni based on his sincerity. And there is the qualification. Narad Muni explains about himself that how he was a small boy and he had no affinity to sports. He was sense controlled. He was not very naughty. So Prabhupada writes a beautiful purport on parenting. In that particular verse. So, and then Narad Muni went on to explain that how he became perfect, right? The Bhakti Vedantas, after the 4 months, they left. They instructed Narad Muni because they became so pleased. They became so pleased by Narad Muni, in that as a maid servant's boy. His heart was completely transformed by their instruction. Right? So whatever he heard, he started applying that, and he saw the transformation. And then when the right time comes, it is explained. We'll see as the chapter flows through in the next chapter also, that his mother, she met with an accident through a snake bite, and then he became free. And then he continued. He continues his journey where he realizes he becomes perfect. Right? He goes into his deep meditation. The techniques that was taught by the Bhakti Vedantas, he applied them. Right? Now, usually we all have received the techniques of devotional service, right? We all know the 64 ways in which we can love Krishna, that is explained by Srila Rupa Goswami Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, right? So we all have the techniques, and we are all trying to apply, right? Now, usually we struggle, right? Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains the whole process of devotional service. The Anartha Nivritti is one stage where most of us get stuck, right? If you're like in a tunnel, you look forward, it's dark. You look backward, it's all dark, and you don't know, what is happening. So because of that, the application in some of the techniques becomes very difficult, and sometimes it doesn't, at least apparently it may seem like the process is not working for us, right? But again, the advantage or the way we continue forward is again to the process of hearing, right? And again, this pandemic has given so much opportunity. Personally, my experience and realization is that some devotees, who we could rarely hear them speak. Now they are out there, locked down in their house, and one way they are doing devotional services, they're speaking, right? And there's so much opportunity for all of us. I hope everybody's taking full advantage of this. The opportunity that we have to be in our homes, and there's so many lectures going on all over the place. It's just like a feast. We don't have to worry about going here, going there. But now, since we don't have this opportunity for personal association, we see that how important it is for us to make full use of this opportunity. So then the storyline concludes, again, this chapter concludes by Narad Muni instructing Vyasadeva that you should go and compile, because you have the knowledge, and he also tells him how to do that, right? He's not just telling him, here, just go and read it, but he tells him how you will read, because without realization, you cannot go and just write it, right? Vyasadeva needed all this information downloaded in his system, so he could write the glories, right? So Vyasadeva, Narad Muni, he's giving Vyasadeva this instruction that you go in deep meditation, you go in samadhi, and in that samadhi, this fame and glory about the Supreme Lord will be downloaded in your system, right? And that Vyasadeva will talk about in the 7th chapter of the 1st canto. What happens when he goes in samadhi, how that information, or how that knowledge, how he becomes self-realized, how he becomes self-realized with this knowledge of Bhagwan, right? And then he continues his journey forward, and then that's the birth of Srimad Bhagavatam. And there's two perspectives, the first one being how Vyasadeva reacted, the previous chapter, how Vyasadeva reacted to this difficulty he was having, and then how Narad Muni, when he appears on the scene, how Narad Muni gives him instruction, the right instruction, so that he can understand and realize, and he gives his own example about how that if we just give oral reception to this message, we can become self-realized. And again, this instruction that Narad Muni gives Vyasadeva is applicable to all of us. Right? It is not just, for us, we already have everything. We're not expected to go in it. But again, in our own way, when we study Srimad Bhagavatam, we can deeply, ponder on these principles that Vyasadeva is saying, that at the end of the day, ultimately, what can really make us happy, what can really make us satisfied in the core of our heart, is when we hear about the glories of the Lord and when we speak the glories about the Lord, right? And that is what is the essence of this chapter, chapter 5th of the 1st canto, is that what really brings us satisfaction is when we hear and speak the glories of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna. That gives us satisfaction, and then at the end of the day, it satisfies the whole universe. And that's exactly what Narad Muni told Vyasadeva, that okay, whatever you have done is good, but now do this, and this is the real hope. And especially for Gaudiya Vaishnavas, Srimad Bhagavatam is Amalam Puran. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu emphasized this scripture over anything, right? This is like our, as we call this, like our Bible, right? And this is what we live and breathe. And that's what we are trying to, that's why I believe this is the Sunday Feast series, although it's all virtual. We are trying to, get this in our system. So whatever time that we have, I'm sure most of us have enough time to study this literature. We do, the small group of devotees, I'm doing this deep dive. We are actually on this, we're supposed to begin this chapter today, the 5th chapter. We have finished 4 chapters so far. And we're basically chewing on every single verse, giving different perspectives, the different commentaries of the different acharyas. Basically, the whole idea is to just relish and remain absorbed in the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam, because this is what happens if we are absorbed on this. Because Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Antakale cha mameva smaran muktva kaleva. That smaran happens or Smaran will happen if we are absorbed. Even it doesn't have to be 24-hour absorption. Even for 5 minutes in a day, if you're absorbed in one verse or some half of the verse, and then the commentaries that our acharyas write, if we can deep dive into it, that's a success. So when death comes, we will have smaran of Srimad Bhagavatam and the beautiful narrations that the different speakers of the different chapters, the different texts, we will have smaran of that, and that will exit us out of this material world. And as Krishna promised in the 13th chapter, if we just hear, right, if we just hear attentively from the right source, we can become free from. And how do we become free? We'll realize the Kshetragya, and then that's like our ticket back home, back to Godhead. So that was my short summary of this 5th chapter. As I said, I can't see who's on and who's not. All I see on my screen is ISKCON Chicago, and I see my image. If there is any questions, I don't know what the agenda is and what the format is. If there's any questions somebody would like to ask, post. We have about 8 minutes. We can do that. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Balaram Prabhu, on YouTube, I'm not seeing any questions coming through so far.
Okay. So you tell me what to do. If you want, we can end, or if there's no questions, I mean, you tell me what's the next thing. I mean, we have 8 minutes. If you want to close, we'll close.
As you like. Oh, one question's coming.
Okay.
Okay, this is from Ananda Prabhu. Hare Krishna, thank you for your short and wonderful presentation. One question, and I'm guessing he's writing it up. Please share a simple formula for increasing our sincerity in devotion. Again, please share a simple formula for increasing our sincerity in devotion.
Simple formula. I mean, Bhakti Yoga is very simple, but it is definitely not very easy to implement. I mean, there are many perspectives. Again, I like to see things in different perspectives. So when we talk about, being sincere, we have to understand devotional service has to be performed based on our core nature. And that core nature is something, you and I have to discover as we move along devotional service, as we move along trying different things within the realm of devotional service as given to us by Srila Prabhupada, right? Sincerity is basically, what does sincerity basically mean? Sincerity means being honest, right? And herein I remember in one of the verses, Purport Prabhupada talks about it, right? Sincerity basically means no duplicity. So what is the simple formula? The whole understanding or the whole idea is, what is that you're looking for, right? Now, for some of us, we are not, we all came into this process of devotional service by the association of some devotee. Right? Some devotee came in our life, and then they gave us guidance, they inspired us, we became inspired by their example, by their character, and then we took onto this process. Now, as we progress along, we see, because our own core swabhav, core nature, is it comes on the foreground, and then we realize that this particular aspect of devotional service is not meant for me, or it is meant for somebody else, right? Now, in Kali Yuga, we have to understand that self-realization is it's a far out object, right? My immediate need is, if I had to take Vyasdev's example, right? See, like at Vyasdev's level, his despondency is explainable, which Narad Muni did. Now, you and I may be struggling with different things, different aspects of our life, right? So, what is a simple formula to be remain sincere is to understand what you really want. Most of us, we have this utopian idea of what we want, right? Somebody is telling me to do something, but if I'm not fully convinced, or if I have not, completely invested in that something, what I've been told, will never be successful, right? That's why the spiritual life, why spiritual life is so dynamic, because although we are receiving instructions, although we've been told to do what we're supposed to do, but you know it ultimately comes to you. It comes to you what you really want to do. And you know my experience, all I can share is my whatever little experience that I have gathered over the years, practicing and struggling to be a sadhaka, is the emphasis that I personally tell myself to remain sincere is to look out for examples, look out for successful examples, because that is very, very important. Narad Muni, like when I remember when I first heard this story of Narada, honestly speaking, I was not super excited. I was not super excited, that Narad Muni, he was a maid servant's son, and then he came in the Sushma Bhakti Vedantas, and then he perfected his life and he became the great Narad Muni. I was not super excited about that story, or that story actually did not inspire me also much, because the officer, that Narad Muni is Narad Muni, you know, because he also talks about some of his character, some of his qualities when he was small, when he was a 5-year boy. He talks about it. And if I had to see I was totally opposite, So that example did not inspire me. So it did inspire me from the fact that the process of hearing is so powerful that if I give oral reception to the Bhakti Vedantas, to Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, I will also develop, that strong affinity to hear, right? But I look out for examples within the vicinity that I live in, right? Within the network of devotees that I interact with. I look out for examples, right? I look out for examples, not negative examples. I look out for positive examples that, here is a devotee who's like me, he's got a 9 to 5 job. Now it is a little different because we are all at home working. It's 10 hours, whatever, 12 hours, with a family, with kids. So I interact with them. I genuinely want to understand how they are able to continue with the devotional life, right? How they have remained sincere in their own devotional life and continue on serving the mission of Lord Chaitanya in their own little way, right? So we have to find that. We have to find those examples. Um, and the more you find those examples, the more you interact with those examples, you can that sincerity that they have can rub up on you, right? And this is I'm beyond doubt convinced about it, that if we make an attempt to seek out for those sincere souls. And in my own little Krishna consciousness, I have such devotees around me. Those, they help me to remain more sincere. So the simple formula is find that sincere devotee and interact with that sincere devotee, right? Because this sincerity is also contagious. You interact with a sincere devotee, there is a nice affection, there is an intimate affection, exchanges between you and that devotee. That sincerity will rub off on you, right? And again, prayers, right? As sadhakas, there is one thing we can all do, right? If we cannot do anything, is we can all pray. We can all pray to Shri Radha and Krishna, Shri Kishore Kishori, that they bestow the buddhi, right, the intelligence, the heart, and the love that is required for us to progress in devotional service, right? Buddhi, intelligence, a genuine heart filled with sincerity, gratitude, and love, so that we can continue on our journey in devotional service. And who knows how many lifetime that is, right? In this lifetime, we have come across so many sweet and wonderful devotees that we're interacting with. And I'm sure most of us are feeling the pain right now. No Sunday feast, the interaction is reduced. But still, we have this medium, whatever technology offers us, we can interact, we can see each other, we can talk to each other through this medium, and continue on our journey. So that is my not so short answer, but I hope that helps, Anand Prabhu.
Okay. Thank you so much, Balaram Prabhu. I'm not seeing any follow-up from him on the chat, so it looks like it's okay. I wanted to thank you very much, especially for taking on this service. I know that Srimad Bhagavatam is something very close to you, and so it's really nice to hear you giving this overview of this chapter. So hopefully this is the first of many more to come.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.